Amen.
Okay, well, hey, so good to be with all of you tonight. If you had a chance to see the week 2 kind of introductory video, I mentioned a movie, and I don't know if any of you have seen the movie or seen the play. The play is called Les Mis, or sometimes the full name is Les Miserables. And it comes from a book by Victor Hugo. It's been famous on Broadway and off Broadway. It's had a number of different renditions through Hollywood, including the most recent one, a number of years ago, with Anne Hathaway and Hugh Jackman, Russell Crowe, very star-studded cast. And so it's been really well treated and out there. But I find when I talk about that movie or play, depending on how you saw it, oftentimes people haven't seen it, and I think it's a have to. How many of you have seen the movie Les Mis, or am I talking another language tonight?
I've been
watching it. I haven't seen it, but when I lived in Vegas, it was a big thing.
Yeah,
yeah. I didn't see it, but it was like one of the biggest thing in Vegas going on. So,
well, I would suggest sometime, Dee, to maybe rent the movie. I don't know how you rent movies, if you stream things, if you got Netflix or what have you. But Les Mis, especially with the cast of Hugh Jackman and that whole gang, that was quite. They did a good job. It's not the same as being on stage, but they did a good job, and they kept the music very much the same. Melissa, what are you going to say?
The link in Moodle has the whole movie.
Oh, it does have the whole movie. That's right. I was thinking it was just the opening few minutes, but it does have the whole movie, doesn't it?
No, I've almost made it like halfway through the movie.
Yeah. It's a long movie. It's probably 2.5 or 3 hours long. That's the problem with it, is that that's not a problem. If it's good, you might as well stay and enjoy it, right? But it's a good movie for this. There's a lot of reasons why people enjoy it. The characters are very well played. The music is very engaging. If you're not familiar with it, it's almost all in song. There's no real speaking parts. It's all musical, hence the name musical. But what I find most engaging, and part of the reason why I bring it up here in week 2, is because it really kind of wrestles with an important question, kind of below the surface. They never ask this question, but as you watch the movie, you will see the two main characters. And for those watching the movie, it's the character played by Hugh Jackman and the character played by Russell Crowe are the two main characters. And what makes their characters so interesting is that they really embody the tension we have in these ideas of law and grace. And so this week being our theme is law and grace. And there's a little bit of there's a question that you'll have to wrestle with a little bit about that. I like to point it out, just not because, I guess if I were to rewrite this class, I would just make that part of what we do. Spend half of our class watching the movie, and then we would go on, because I think that would be enjoyable. The character, and what you will want to watch when you watch that link, the opening scenes, the character played by Hugh Jackman is at the beginning of the movie a convict, and he is then released on parole, but finds that the world still doesn't work for him, that because of his past, the fact that he was at one time a lawbreaker, he is viewed as somehow less than by the world around him, and it chafes him. He struggles with that. He hates the world. And then right away, that's just the opening few moments. And then right away, he is touched. Another character in the movie comes along and touches him, not with judgment for his being a lawbreaker, or even anger at the fact that he again broke the law, but extends mercy and what we would call grace to him. And it so touches him that he is in that moment changed. And the rest of the movie tracks his changed life, a man who was touched by grace. Now, the other character who plays into this, and he again starts off at the beginning, and he kind of weaves in and throughout the movie. Played by Russell Crowe, is the character who represents the law. He is a lawman, and his name is Javert. And Javert's role in the movie is to try to pursue this lawbreaker, Jean Valjean, and to find out where he is, because they realize he is on parole and he's broken parole. And so the heart of the movie is his pursuit of Valjean. It comes down to a very dramatic conclusion where it's almost like there's a point where it becomes so difficult for the two of them kind of to operate. You know, which is it? Which is going to be the stronger weight? Is grace going to be more life-giving, or is law the way to go? And of course, between you and me, we know that they both function, and they function together. But the interesting part of the movie is the way that it plays those two polar extremes, because I think that's part of the question. And part of the question really of the New Testament is, yeah, law is important, but along with law, grace must be applied. Otherwise, we simply become legalistic. We become bent on rule following, which was exactly, as you read through the New Testament, you see that's kind of what Jesus was speaking to the Pharisees whenever they struggled with him, was because that they had become a people who were bent on following the rules rather than understanding the nature and the character of God, which was rightly to be understood in the rules, as well as in the grace that he extends to us. So it becomes, I think, an interesting, I don't know about Victor Hugo, the writer of the story. I don't know about his faith or where he was coming from, but I think he did a pretty insightful job of wrestling with those two aspects of what does it mean to, why do people seek to do good in this world? Is it because we are afraid of breaking the rules and we want to be rule followers? Or is being recipients of grace a better and more pure motivator for living a good life? And so it comes, but there's so much more. I say that and I try to make it into some theological dissertation. It's not that. It's a great story. It's a story of friendship and loyalty and living for something bigger than yourself. It's bold, it's sweeping, the music is great. Every time I watch it, I cry. And if ever you'd watch movies with me, you know that's not a big deal. I cry at a lot of movies, but every time this one gets me. And always the same place. And sometimes I'll even just hear the music and I'll start to cry. And it's like, this is not fair. I shouldn't be crying. I think that's just as I get older, I get a little more sentimental. But so I always say, if you haven't seen the movie, it's worth a watch. And as you watch it, if you watch it this week, it'll help with the assignments. And if you don't watch it this week, just watch it sometime. I think you would enjoy it. But look for that. Look for that and just wrestle with that question yourself. Why is Valjean such a noble character? What is it that makes him so pure and so we're just so drawn to him? And underneath it all, the way Hugo wrote the script, the story, is because he received grace, and I think that's a good word for us too, as we look at the Bible, look through this lens at the Bible of law and grace. So, so Melissa, you've watched part this time, huh? So far?
My headphones cut out. What'd you say?
I said, so you've begun watching it this week.
Oh yeah, I watched it. I watched the 35 minutes for the assignment, and then kind of just kept watching it to see what would happen. Okay, good. And Kayla, you said you've seen it before?
Yes, I've seen it before, but I think it was through PBS. PBS did another version as well, and it was a pretty good one as well. But I'm always down to watch it again. It's a good movie. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It was PBS. Was it the musical?
Yes, I think it was the musical because there was a lot of singing.
Yeah.
I can't remember what actors played it, but there were also big actors as well that played it as well. But it's a really good movie, and it's still like I could watch it again and still like, whoa, like that's crazy.
So any of you, I just recommended, this is our free, not part of the class, but free to you, just recommendation. Good movie, inspiring, and I think you would enjoy it. But it also does, it fits in with our theme this week. And our theme this week is law and grace. And as I said in that same intro video, one of the struggles we have when it comes to the Bible, and when we hear things like there are over 600 laws in the Bible, that becomes daunting. And people think, well, the Bible must just be a rule book. It's not, but there are sections of law. And again, it's just another genre of the Bible that we have to understand. There are different rules for law codes than there are for narrative or poetry or wisdom literature. And so we simply have to understand that there are parts of the Old Testament, mostly in those first 5 books of the Bible, but a few other places as well. Most famous of those are the 10 Commandments. Sometimes we kind of walk through and see who can name off the most 10 Commandments. That's okay. We're not going to do that tonight. It's much more fun when we're sitting around the room and we can kind of tease each other. But that becomes kind of a foundation, but there's a lot more in the Old Testament. But again, the question for us comes down to, okay, so if we're reading the Bible today, if we're Christians reading the Bible, how much of those 600 are really applicable to us? And how important is it to be following those guidelines or those rules? And I would suggest to you that things like the 10 Commandments are important because we see in the New Covenant, in the New Testament, when Jesus came, he did reference them and say these are important things to follow. But a lot of the Old Testament law is there for that purpose of creating a community in their time, in their day, in their culture, out of a group of people who were not a community. And so the function of the law was not so much like we think of law, to differentiate between good and bad. But the main feature of the law was to differentiate this people, this unique people of God, different from the world around them. And so they would do things, and part of those became kind of like an identifier. You're part of this community if you do these things, if you keep the Sabbath, if you wear your hair in a certain way, if you don't dress with certain types of clothing, if you don't eat certain types of foods. And a lot of those that you and I would probably simply just out of hand not bother listening to, rather than just dismissing them, we need to understand in their historical context, what was their purpose. And so when we read them, we may dismiss them. We may say, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and keep eating shrimp because I like the way it tastes. And bacon, I will continue to eat my bacon, even though in the Old Testament I'm told not to eat pork. But rather than just dismiss it out of hand, whatever it is you had for dinner tonight, Kayla, see, I'm still doing the food thing, sorry. Whatever it is that we do with it, it's better to know, okay, well, those were important pieces for what it meant for them to be a community of followers, and kind of creating a sense of identity that they had these rules, these boundaries, these do's and don'ts that help them know, are we part of this covenant community or are we outside of this covenant community? And again, a lot of times we tend to get balled up in that and think, well, either we keep the rules, all of them, or we keep none of them. And really that's misunderstanding what the function of the law codes are for us. So it's an important piece, but it's important that we understand what it is. And Jesus wrestled with that as well. And so for us as New Testament readers, we need to recognize that the law still has a role, but it's not the same as it was for those in Old Testament times. Okay, I wanted to just touch on a couple things because I think there's some really interesting videos this week for you, and I think you probably already watched them. But just address a couple of questions that we have tonight. And maybe if you've got some questions on the assignments, this would help us stay on track. I'd like to talk a little bit about 2.4. It's called the literary worksheet. Some of you have already done it. I tried to get the word out earlier. I was getting a number of questions about it. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that 2.4. And then before we get done tonight, talk a little bit about another assignment in our group tonight, and then one for next week as well. So let's start there. Let's go to 2.4. I'm going to try to do this. Okay, can you see on my screen? Or have I been able to share my screen with you?
Yes.
Okay, very good. I'm a novice at this, so if I don't do it right, please tell me. This is how that 2.4, the Literary World Worksheet, or sometimes called the Exodus Literary World Worksheet, is. And it's really not a difficult assignment, but every time I teach the class, I find that it's not an easy assignment to interpret. That we tend not to understand what's being asked of us. And once we understand it, it's not hard to do. What it basically is going to ask you to do is take a look at a passage of the Bible. You go to the book of Exodus, that's the second book in the Bible, and turn to chapter 33, beginning at verse 1. It's going to be about a chapter and a half worth of reading. And as we scroll down, we're going to be just doing starting in kindergarten. We're doing a real basic understanding of what is going on in the narrative. For example, question 1, and there's 3 questions you'll be dealing with. Question 1 is simply this: who is the voice? As we read it, who is speaking? And they begin with a pattern. You can see chapter 33, verses 1 through 3, it's God speaking to Moses. And then there's a verse that is a narrator giving us a little bit of a narration of what's going on. And then it goes back in verse 5 to God speaking. And then in 36 goes the narrator, and it continues for a while. Pretty soon there'll be time when Moses will speak to God. But it doesn't have that on your pattern here. So question 1 is just to continue that pattern along, to go on throughout the rest of chapter 33 and into 34 up until verse 9, doing that same thing, simply writing who is speaking, whose voice am I hearing as I'm reading this text. And we do that partly because it's just a very basic question for us as we're beginning to look at this from that literary world perspective, that we get a chance to say, it's just a literary device to understand how this narrative is going along. Now, the second question will be similar. Second question, similar in this, that you follow that same pattern again, that it gives you an example, about 5 examples here, get you started, but then you continue that on through the rest of chapter 33, and you go on to 34 until verse 9. But on this one, instead of saying who is asking the question, we ask you to interact with the story. And so there's no right or wrong questions here to raise, but this is a time for you to consider questions. For example, they give you some here for 33 verses 1 and 3. It says, what information is being given and how does this shift the story? So we're going from that kindergarten level, what's happening here, who's speaking, to being a little more inquisitive. And you're beginning to ask questions of it, not what questions are being asked by the text, but what questions would you bring to the text? Where did this come from? Why does God become angry? Is this similar to something in the past? Is there another section that touches on these same themes? And you can see some of the questions that they have here, but just to kind of ask questions to try to get into the mind of the author. That's really number 2. And again, as long as you're asking questions that are pertinent to the text, there's really no right or wrong questions there on the second part. And then the third question is simply to take a look at that and then look at the tail end of it. And ask you to, what impact, what is the impact of God revealing the divine name in Exodus 34, 6 through 7. And then it's going to ask you to go back and look at a couple different places, some different scriptures, and ask, how they all kind of relate together. So this is where we're asking you to take and do a little bit of analysis when God reveals his name here to Moses and to the children of Israel in 34, 6 and 7. What is the impact? What do you see going on? How do you see that name either affecting what is said or affecting those who hear it? And then ask the question, just follow through and ask those questions. What difference does those other verses make in light of these events that happened in chapter 19 as well as in chapter 32? So there are three completely different tasks here to this question, but just walk them through. And again, just walk through the pattern of going through the chapter. Whose voice am I hearing? Go through the pattern of the rest of the chapter. What questions might I bring to this story to better understand it if I can get into the mind of the writer? And then just wrestle a little bit. What's going on here with this name of the Lord being revealed in Exodus 34? And how does that affect what's going on? So the rest of it, and this is, unfortunately, this often causes more confusion than light. This is interesting reading, but it doesn't directly pertain to the analysis that we're asking you to do. This is just kind of an extra document here, and it talks about the various ways as we read through texts like this Exodus 33. It gives us a chance. There are things to look for. How does the author order the events? That becomes part of what we look for, because sometimes they do it in a straightforward fashion. Sometimes there's flashbacks. Sometimes there's steps forward, and this is kind of, they're saying this is why we do this. There's a lot of ways that they do ordering of events in narratives, and that's a good thing to look for. Sometimes we'll see repetition of events. Sometimes we'll see that things happen that they seem to take quite a long time. In fact, there'll be an issue here where it seems like there's quite a bit of time passing in just a single verse. And yet sometimes there are many verses that happen really simultaneously. And so how does time pass? And so these are just some other things. Casual links, causal links, things that cause other things to happen. What are the connections? When there's conflict, and how does that often raise up the question of the story? We'll see one actually next week. We'll look at a story involving King David, and we'll look for the conflict that the author uses to kind of drive the story forward. The characters, how do they depict characters? How do the characters, how does that happen? There's just a number of characteristics of Hebrew narrative that these are just some pointers, but it really doesn't necessarily pertain directly. We have to read it in order to use it for the rest of that 2.4. Okay. Now, I know some of you had questions about it. Have I been able to address those questions?
Okay, so just for clarification.
Yes.
Just go through the patterns 1 through 3 and how you said, I already wrote notes on it. Okay. And then the very last part where you said something about it being a little confusing. Do I have to put the bottom part where it says week 2 preparational assignment? Do I have to add that to the paper, or I worry about that next week?
You can leave that completely off.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, I did not hear any other questions, so we'll move forward then. But I did want to touch on that. There's a lot of questions, and if you've already completed the assignment and now you're kind of saying, "Oh no, I didn't do it right," go ahead and resubmit if you would like to. What I really want to do is give you a chance to make sure you understood what it was you were trying to do, so that we can do that assignment well. It's kind of foundational. It's not critical, but it is helpful. Another assignment that another assignment I would like to show you is the maps assignment. I had some questions about that. I think that one is actually easier, but I also want to recognize that sometimes it can be confusing. So I'm going to share this with you. This is what you'll see inside the syllabus, or when you download the app or download the map. There is all these squiggly lines, and if you kind of turn your head sideways, you can look at it, and you'll see that it is it's intended to be a map of of Northern Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. And so you can find some things, and we're going to simply ask you to go through and identify. There's a number on the other, actually, and here's the second map. This is a map that is to be the map of Palestine. And so what you do is you look on the other assignment, the paper that has the questions, and it will tell you, it gives you about a dozen different features that you then go on and identify them. For example, you'd see this squiggly line here and say that is the Nile River, because that is the Nile River. Or maybe you go over here and say, oh, this is the Tigris River. Okay, and so you identify on your map rivers, gulfs, seas, countries like Egypt, for example, or Mesopotamia. Find some of those that are on that list of things you need to identify, and find them and identify them on the map. Sometimes it's easier if you find a good map, for example, in the back of your Bible, to go, and I like to color this in. So I like to color in some of the blue, like where the Red Sea is here, or the Persian Gulf is here, or the Mediterranean Sea, so that I get a little bit of, so that it doesn't look like just a bunch of black and white squiggly lines. That's a little bit easier to see. So it's a little bit confusing at first, but that's what we need you to do on this assignment for those two maps, to fill out. There's, I think about 8 or 10 things to identify on that map, and there are maybe 4 things to identify, to simply place them on here and show me where certain things are, like the Sea of Galilee. Yeah, be one of the ones that we'd have to identify on this map and show where it is. Okay, questions on the map?
I got the map part. My question was on the actual questions. Were we supposed to do the actual questions?
Yes. Okay, let me go to that one, because I have that one here next too. I'm just not as good with this. Okay, this is the page you're talking about, Melissa. Okay, yeah, what you do is go ahead and read the text up here at the top, pages 2288 from the new Oxford Annotated Bible. You go to the very far back, and there's a couple of pages there to read, which will give a little bit of background on the ancient Near East, which is where the Bible is placed.
Oh, I should write those down, because the one I got in my syllabus says it's pages 2234 and 2236. Look.
Okay. And that was in the syllabus?
Yeah, this one.
That's probably an old.
Because I printed the whole syllabus, and I was like, oh, I already got this. Why am I going to print it out again?
You may have that, and mine may be wrong. I may be working.
It's different in Moodle. I have the numbers you have in Moodle.
Yeah,
from
see how
in Moodle, it's the same numbers you're showing right now.
Okay, and it's in Moodle? Well,
Yeah,
one of them is wrong, isn't there? Okay, so what number do you have, Melissa?
The one that I says, it says page 2234 through 2236.
Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb. I think you have just corrected us. I'm almost certain that's what we want to be reading.
Okay.
2234
So that's in the
And
syllabus.
it just,
Okay.
it's in the back of the, am I still, yeah, it's in the back, and it's just an essay, and it talks about, I don't know why I would have to, so it just says on the first page,
Okay.
it says essays, tables, bibliographs, glossary, index.
Okay. Now, okay, well, I'm going to go back to it. I think what you have is one that's probably based on the 4th edition. This is, I think, the one we have now. You probably had the 5th edition of this Bible. And so the 2288, the key thing is you want to look for, this section is called the geography of the Bible, because we're talking about maps and geography. And so
Oh, yeah.
you will find that in the 4th edition, but it's on different
Yours
pages.
is right.
Yeah.
The paper you have, the 2288.
2288 is the one that matches up with our 5th edition, unless by chance, like I'm sitting over here looking over at my 4th edition over on my bookshelf behind me. And that's one of the confusing things. But yeah, you want to get those numbers and look at those particular maps, map 7, map 8, and map 11 in the back. And as you go to the back of your Bible, you see there's a number of maps, and it just simply says that map number, what they are. And those are the maps that will be most helpful for you in doing this particular assignment.
Yeah, I didn't have a problem doing the maps. I thought it was fun. I got to color. I colored all the water in so I could figure out where the land was. I was like, ooh, that's Italy. So that's surrounded by water.
Yep, good. I'm glad you were identifying it.
But when I started reading the 2, 2, 3, 4 through 3, 6, I was like,
pages. Yeah, it didn't fit.
Yeah, it didn't make any sense to me. But this does now.
It won't. And I'm sorry about that. Yeah,
That's
go to the section on geography of the Bible, and it's on the pages that I have here on the screen. So write those down. And I'm sorry. So that's on Moodle, but it's not on the, okay. Yeah, it's one of those things that sometimes we get old.
Things get updated and then they're everywhere, and it only gets updated in a couple places.
In the different professors, some of them catch it, some don't. And yeah, it becomes confusing. So, but this is the right one. And so again, you have 4 questions to read through those about 3 pages, and then answer these 4 questions. And then at the bottom is, these are the items you want to put on those maps. These are that first one, the map of the Fertile Crescent, is the one that Melissa, you were talking about. It had Italy and the Mediterranean Sea. That's the one where you want to find all of these items: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Babylonia, Assyria. And again, you look at those maps, the maps that are up at the top of the page here. That's where you're going to have. You can do it. You can do them anywhere. You can Google them. That's fine. But these will be helpful.
If you Google it, Google biblical maps of this area, because I Googled just that area and it's not the same.
No, see what that those things will do just fine for things like the Nile River, the Tigris River, or Euphrates. But because they're maps of current day, they won't have places like Babylonia, because Babylonia is not a country anymore. They won't have Assyria. Assyria does not exist any longer. Those are nations in Bible times. And so those will be much more helpful if you look at the maps that are in your Bible, and that'll be helpful to you. Okay? So again, sorry for the question about the page numbers as well as other confusions around that. That's why I wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay? Good.
Quick question. So we find the 1 through 4 questions in the Bible that we had to buy, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's where you'll find these. And if Kayla, do you have that Bible yet?
Yes, I got it through Kindle.
Okay, good, fantastic. Okay, yeah. And so hopefully what I would say is maybe even look it up in the table of context. I'm guessing you have one of those in your Kindle, and it will say geography of what did I say? How do we term that? 2288.
Oh, my head is killing me.
Geography of the Bible. There you go. That's pretty straightforward. But that's what you want to look for, and it'll be there at the end of the rest of it, because it's right at the end. If you're using the big red Bible, it's at the very, very end of it. It's way back here. So, but yeah. So those answers. would best come from that. Although some of them you'd be able to find other places. But again, if you look at those 2.5 pages in your Bible, you get all the answers you need for these things.
Thank
Okay,
you.
you're welcome. All right, and then lastly, I want to just touch on this as well. Share one more screen. Where is it? Okay, in our Moodle, coming up for next week, and I was hoping to talk a little bit about the. I'm not going to talk about the Miller-McLemore book, and just see how things are going with you in the way of getting a feel for what this, the psychology, how does a Christian view of humanity and people, how does that affect psychology, and how does psychology begin to affect our view of the Bible, or how we view people. So I think it's kind of interesting questions, especially that question dealing with children as a victim. I think that's a kind of an interesting, thought-provoking question to ask. And so as you're reading through Miller-McLemore, just take a look and wrestle with that. How does that begin to play in our world? Okay, finally is this. I want to go to, see, we're not going to do that page. Okay, we're not going to do that discussion tonight, but I do want to touch on next week. And I know it's not open yet, but I want to just highlight it because it will open, but I want you to be aware. In fact, I might open it up earlier this weekend just so you have it, not that you need to do it yet. The very first assignment that we're going to have is one that's called a One Great Person worksheet. And what that is simply that we ask you to find 10 people. You can do it by going and seeing people, but now being we're all kind of cut off, you might want to do it via phone call or through a text message, or you might even go through social media if you want to get on and talk to some of your friends that way. But you need to interview 10 people, and the question is very simple. Name a great person. And the idea is that we want you then to, and you'll see the form there, they give you instructions and they give you a table to work with. It gives you room for, who is the person you interviewed? Who did they say is a great person, and perhaps why? Sometimes people wonder what you're up to, what are you trying to get at? And say, no, I just want to know who you think is great. And because we'll talk next week, we'll take a little time in class next week to walk through this and get some of your input that you receive from other people. When people hear the word great or great person, they have to fill in the blanks about what that means. And so it helps us understand what people think of in terms of what makes a person great. Because that's part of what we'll talk about next week. We'll talk a little bit about leadership. We'll talk a little bit about greatness, and we'll talk a little bit about how the Bible perceives that or portrays it. But this is a good way to begin getting our thoughts around that. Who do people say is great? Because sometimes we think of greatness as ability or achievements, or lots of different reasons. Notoriety, something that makes a person famous. So there's a lot of reasons that people will write or mark it as great. The question is, we want to get a feel for it. The challenge for you, and this would be easier if we were just doing things normally, is that it's fun when you can get some kids involved, because kids will answer this different than adults will. But also to get adults answering the question. So if you do have an opportunity to talk to children, to include them in your interviews as some of your 10, that would be great. And because the wider the range of recipients, probably the wider the range of different people, hence different rationales for what makes them great. So let me see if I click on that. Yeah, so here's our instructions. Again, you're going to interview 10 different people, different ages is preferred, and just ask them simply this, who is a great person and why do you think they're great? Then the second part, once you've done that, then there is an essay assignment, and that's where you read a couple chapters out of the Grimm's Root book, 10 and 11, and then using some of that teachings about what Jesus said about greatness, characteristics that people brought up in your interviews. That's where that kind of the heart of that essay will come from. So do your interviews, kind of do a little bit of analysis about what people said, and then the essay kind of flows out of that. And that'll be our first assignment next week, and you'll make more sense when we get to class next Thursday night. Okay?
So wait a minute.
Go ahead, Dee.
Okay, so after I'm sorry. So we got to write an essay. We're going to put together everything they said.
You know what? Okay. It'll make more sense when you look at it on your own. When I open it up on Moodle,
Okay.
you can see it.
Okay.
There's two forms. There's a form that you will simply fill in the blanks. You will,
Okay.
This person who is X amount old said this is who they were and this is why. And then you kind of take all that basic information and then you kind of create your essay out of your basic information.
I'm sure it goes along with the reading that's in the Bible and all that stuff too. So we'll have a better understanding once you get the reading.
And once you've read Grimm's Root chapters 10, chapter 11, it'll also help with that as far as taking the information you receive about what makes a person great in the eyes of people that live around you. And then just do a little bit of interaction with what Grimm's Root talks about greatness. Okay? But that's coming, so I just didn't want you to be surprised by it. But no, so you'll have to be thinking about who are the 10 people I'm going to interview, in what form, how am I going to interview? Again, in days past, when you were teaching or working in the classroom, you talk to all your co-teachers and you talk to your students, and you'd be done. But if you're not in that environment now, it may be different. Okay.
Okay. Well, let's all be calling you.
Yeah, you can call me, or you can talk to one another. It's really not hard. Once you walk through once you look and see what the page looks like, you'll see that it's pretty easy to follow. Okay.
Sounds like a fun assignment, though.
It is. It's really different. Gets us out of our reading and gets us more into interacting with people and analyzing what they have to say.
I'm gonna borrow some of my students.
Do. That's absolutely it.
I
That's
will.
exactly how the assignment is designed, so you can borrow your students and pick their brain.
Awesome.
Okay. All righty then. If that is good, then I'm going to say let's call this a night unless there's an important question that needs to be addressed here tonight. Okay. Now
Good night, Professor.
I'm going to say thank you guys. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank
And
you.
I hope, and again, if anyone missed it, Melissa, if you can let those who were unable to be here tonight, let them know, at least they will have, so they can walk through, see the assignments, and hopefully get the instructions as
Ooh.
well.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you going to place the video again? Because I had, that really worked for me.
Did it really?
Dang.
Yeah, I'll take
Appreciate
this,
that.
we'll get a recording of it, and by tomorrow, probably by midday, I'll have it up. So
Okay.
that, and especially for those who are unable to be with us tonight, they at least would get some of those instructions.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Good
Yes,
night,
have a great evening.
everyone. See y'all next week. Have a good
Good
week.
night.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Blessings to everyone. Bye.